It's the most wonderful time of the year. This is the most wonderful time of the year, we are told, Christmas time in the United States. And many of us I know genuinely agree that this is the most wonderful time of the year. This is Christmas. There is a season of twinkling lights and cookies and music and presents. Who doesn't love lights and cookies and music and presents? But it's not the happiest season of all for all of us all the time. Of course, many of us don't celebrate Christmas, and having a Christian religious holiday permeating every public space of this country for an entire month, from drugstores to city hall to television to radio, this can make a huge number of people feel invisible or suffocated. And other kinds of suffering don't stop because it's Christmas time either, right? People still receive scary diagnoses this time of year. People die this time of year. People are incarcerated right now. People are hungry right now. We are entering our second pandemic Christmas time, and like last year, we are watching COVID case numbers skyrocket around us. We're watching ICUs fill up again with the new fast-spreading variant. Nearly true for all of us, at least, is that once we have lived a little bit of life, this is mostly a complicated season, right? That doesn't make a really catchy holiday song title, though, so maybe that's why we don't hear it on the radio. Even when we find joy in Christmas traditions, the intense focus on family and get-togethers can bring up the grief of loved ones who are no longer with us, or beloved family members who were also abusive family members. And even as we watch our children delight at the decorations that are strung around our neighborhoods, we can feel stressed and guilty that we can't afford the kind of Christmas presents that we know that they want. Even if we love baking holiday treats, our seasonal depression can grow during these short days and long nights. Our eating disorders can grow during these times. In his poem, Auguries of Innocence, William Blake writes, "Joy and woe are woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silken twine." Joy and woe are woven fine. In this holiday season and in every holiday season, the hearts of those gathered in worship this morning and every heart, joy and woe are woven fine. I love that phrase from William Blake. Even as the most naive parts of me really just want joy to be the only fabric of my life. Joy and woe are woven fine, clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silken twine. When Blake says woven fine, I think he means fine like thin, perfect, beautiful strands woven tightly and expertly together. A little bit maybe like the fabric that's on our screen here in the sanctuary and has been coming up on the Zoom feed several times. Woven fine as opposed to woven rough, silk chiffon as opposed to burlap. The difference between fine weaving and rough weaving shows up in how smooth and whole the final fabric feels, and how difficult it is to unravel and separate the strands. Under every grief and pine, Blake writes, pine, I think pine like when you pine for someone or something, not pine like a pine tree. Just figured that one out early this morning. I was like, I wonder why pine trees are part of the poem. Under every grief and pine, under yearning and grief, runs a joy with silken twine. And by twine, I think he means the original version of twine, which comes from the word two, so two strands spun closely together, not twine like that scratchy rope that we use to tie packages together. So under grief, under our yearning for someone, in our loneliness, under our yearning for something different than what is now, runs a joy as well. And the strands, like silk, the most soft and light and strong fiber, are entwined with one another. The joy and the woe entwined, twisted together, and then woven into a fine cloth. As Khalil Gibran wrote in the poem that Valerie read for us earlier, I say unto you, joy and sorrow are inseparable. It seems to me that the fine weaving of joy and woe is apparent most in these times when we're supposed to be all happy or all sad. Times like Christmas, or really this whole month of December, which nearly every Christmas song other than Blue Christmas speaks to as a happy time. Times like weddings, which are supposed to be the happiest days of a young couple's life. Times like the birth of babies, which are supposed to be the best day of a new parent's life. Even times like funerals, which are supposed to be devastatingly sad and nothing more. Nearly every movie and song in our culture speaks to us of this separation of joy and woe. We're like a happily ever after or a tragic culture, but not a both-and culture. And, I know that life isn't really like the movies. We know that, right, in our heads. When I use my rational brain, I could say to you that everything is complicated and no experience is all one thing or another. We know that in our brains. But the desire to have my own story of love and life resemble the stories I've heard and seen in books and movies and songs goes beyond my rational brain. Those stories can be stronger than even our own memories sometimes, I think, stronger than our own truth experiences. And it can feel incredibly disorienting and lonely to discover that our own story doesn't fit with what we've been told to feel. My father was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer a couple of months before I became engaged to my first spouse. And when my now ex-husband proposed to me, it was a beautiful place, it was a beautiful night. We had just eaten bread and cheese, my favorite. We had just eaten lobster, my other favorite. We had just drank champagne, there were rose petals, and I was in love. It was everything that the movies told me I should have for my proposal. But shortly after I said yes, because yes was the right answer, even though that relationship has ended now, I found myself sobbing uncontrollably into my partner's arms. There was joy there, yes. But the woe of my father's illness was entwined with it, woven fine together, and the emotional intensity of becoming engaged unleashed the emotional intensity of knowing that my father would die. I had never seen a movie where a future bride lost it during a proposal the way I lost it that night. I didn't have a way of understanding what I was feeling. I felt alone, I felt ashamed. And when a colleague that I worked with at the time congratulated me a couple days later on becoming engaged, and she was like, "What's your wedding date? What colors are you going to decorate your reception with?" I relayed the details of the proposal: bread and cheese, champagne, lobster, rose petals, on top of the hill, sunset. It sounded so romantic, but the story felt so empty to me. I didn't know how to talk about the inseparability of my grief from my love. I was embarrassed that I wasn't just fully happy to be engaged. And so I just plastered a fake smile on my face and tried to get out of the conversation as quickly as possible. Now that I'm a minister, I make sure to ask every couple whose wedding I'm officiating where their grief is in this time. I ask them about the grief that they carry with them. Because no one will tell you that there can be enormous grief during this time, I usually say to them, whether because of absent loved ones or difficult family dynamics, or simply a loss of that single independent self that you used to be as you transition into a new self. I tell couples, make space for your grief as you plan for your joy. Because I don't think anyone else tells us that there should be grief as we plan for joy. Even grief lives in the happiest of weddings. No one makes space for that loss that comes about in the process of preparing for a child or the enormous emotional difficulty of growing your family, even when you want that child more than anything, even when that child is healthy and you are healthy, even when you love this new addition of your family beyond words. And no one speaks openly about the relief that can come when a loved one who has been suffering from a long time dies, or how the release of the uncertainty of someone being sick for a long time can be liberating, or how sometimes when a life has been long and well-lived, that death can bring tears and grief, but it can also bring feelings of love and laughter as the loved one's life is celebrated. I was reminded of this weaving of woe and joy at the memorial service for our longtime member Harvey Anderson yesterday, because it did truly feel like a celebration of life for him. Harvey was someone who lived a long time and who knew that his death was approaching when his cancer treatments finally stopped working. He had a chance to say goodbye, and he had a chance to tell the people that he cared for what they meant to him. When I heard that he was going into hospice, I gave him a call, and he answered the phone. Once he heard who it was, he said, "Death is the price of life." It's like, that's true, Harvey. I'm glad you feel that way. Harvey was at peace with his life, and in the end, he was even at peace with his death. And in radiating that peace as his life drew to a close, he gave the rest of us to feel permission to feel joy and gratitude for his life, even as we grieve his death. And I know, like many of you, I feel woe at the loss of Harvey. I miss him. I keep looking to, he hasn't been here since we've been back in the sanctuary, but I'm used to his face on Zoom. I'm used to him sitting in one of those front pews on that side. I'll miss his loud jokes, and I'll miss his rants about politics and his insights into philosophy. I will even miss the screeches of feedback. You know I'm talking about, John B. The screeches of feedback that sometimes come with our, inadequate listening assistive devices that Harvey used every week when he would turn it up really high and it would do feedback with his hearing aids. I'll miss some of those screeches that told me that Harvey was in the room. He lived 83 years, but he wanted to live longer. He wanted to see his grandchildren grow up. And as they lit and extinguished the chalice yesterday, I saw how small they still are. I grieve his loss, but thinking about Harvey also still makes me laugh. Psychology tells us that the highs and lows of life are inexorably tied. That when we seek to avoid those depths of our sadness, we also cut ourselves off from the heights of our happiness. As Khalil Gibran said, that the deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. Instead of letting ourselves be carved by our sorrow, though, many of us just do whatever we can to escape our sorrow, right? We seek to numb ourselves out with TV or video games or just focusing on something else. Or sometimes it's alcohol or drugs or food. But we know that when we numb ourselves out, when we numb out the sorrow and the sadness, we are also numbing out the joy. Distractions and addictions keep us in a narrow range rather than a full range. And sometimes that's worth it. Sometimes we can't actually go to those depths all the time. But sometimes it really robs us of something important. One of the most powerful messages of religious communities of all kinds is that life isn't divided into happy times and sad times, that we need not be ashamed to feel grief when we're supposed to be feeling joy. We need not be embarrassed when happiness and sorrow are entangled in our lives. Religion reminds us through ancient story and through bittersweet music like what Ken sang for us earlier, although that's secular music, I guess, right? Fiddler on the Roof. A certain kind of religion. I'm looking at Ken because he's a musical theater. Musical theater is sort of a religion to you in some way. And this is church, whatever, we sang it here. Bittersweet music, balm in Gilead, sunrise, sunset. Religion helps to remind us that life holds it all. Like thin, soft, beautiful strands, our joy and our sorrow, our anger and our fear, our love and our warmth are twined together, woven together, inseparable across all the days of our lives. Christmas songs don't tell us this, and the movies don't tell us this. Pop radio stations don't tell us this, but religious communities do. And when it feels like it's too much to hold, when we feel like we can't go into those carving depths of sorrow in our life, or that we are so high up we need to share it with someone else, religious communities are there for us then as well. They give us a community of support and care when we are at our lowest lows. They give us a group of people to celebrate and share our joys when we are feeling high. Congregations like this one celebrate and mourn with us, sunrise and sunset. No one told me that it was okay to weep with grief the night of a deeply joyful proposal. I should have read the Khalil Gibran poem before that day, I suppose. A woman says, "Speak to us of joy and sorrow," and he answered, "Your joy is your sorrow unmasked. And the selfsame well from which your laughter rises is oftentimes filled with your tears. And how else can it be? The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain." Gibran says, "When you are joyous, look deep into your heart, and you shall find it is only that which has given you sorrow that now gives you joy. And when you're sorrowful, look again into your heart, and you shall see that in truth you are weeping for that which has given you delight." They are inseparable. Inseparable. Our culture says that we must feel one thing and not another, that when we feel something too deeply, we should numb out. Too many will tell us this season, be of good cheer. It's the most wonderful time of the year. And there's few places where we can bring our whole selves. There's few people we can bring our whole selves to. My friends, I hope that you find you can bring your whole self here every Sunday, every time we gather in the middle of the week for our choir rehearsals and our small group ministries, for our committee meetings and our gatherings with church friends. None of us need be ashamed of feeling whatever we're feeling at any point in time. And so if you have had a time in your life when you've been embarrassed that you felt something different from what others wanted you to feel or expected you to feel, I hope you can open a new space for yourself to feel whatever is coming up for you. And more than that, I hope you can be that person for someone else, the person that you needed in that moment. I hope that I can be to you all what I needed from my colleague back in the day who asked about the colors of my reception and not how I was coping with my father's grief. Because that colleague had lost a brother to the same brain cancer that I was losing my dad to, and she was there for me in other days, but not that day. I hope each one of us can be that person that we so need to someone else. I hope we can be that person to ourselves. Joy and woe are woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silken twine. My friends, may we be entangled. Amen.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abbey Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, and you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abbey just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.